Thanks for the opportunity to tell you a bit more about CX Lab and how we use behavioural science in both the virtual and the real world to investigate human behaviour, specifically in both customers and employees of businesses. So we're very much focused on the business side of things and emulating some of the things that Dan does, but not as exciting, I'm sad to say. We're interested in what real people do in real time so that we can both improve their experiences and the commercial returns for our clients and businesses. So we're focused on that business side of things. So today I want to illustrate that, especially with our online kind of research, by talking about a particular study that we did, which will hopefully throw some light on kind of a very hard problem. And that is, how does colour influence human behaviour in the real world, in the real commercial world? And how might a better understanding of this help business? In other words, what is the colour of money? Now, colour, as we know, plays a huge role in business in terms of businesses communicating with their customers, spending billions and billions of dollars a year to get the right colour on logos, communication, store design, all those kind of things to make customers more likely to buy products and services. And in fact, here's a wheel that I found from a design company that tells you exactly what all colours actually mean. Very interesting. However, we know from experiments like this one here, and I'm sure you've seen this before, that human perception is actually flawed. If you look at the two squares A and B, you're likely to see square A as being darker than square B, when in fact they're the same color. Because of the context that you view it in, things are different. And similarly, with this color blindness test here, if you see the number 21 in this bunch of dots, then you're likely to be one of the 8% of men, although only 0.5% of women, interestingly, who are red-green colorblind. If you see 74, then you're not. So I think what this shows is that our reaction to color is not predictable because it's individual and it's different. So it's not just the mechanics of how we perceive color in our brains, how our visual neurons respond to light, but also the context with which we view the color can make a huge difference to both our perception and then indeed our response. So on our color wheel here, you can see that red is associated with boldness and passion, but also in many cultures, as we know, it signals danger and something to be avoided. So clearly for a product or a service, that might not necessarily be a good thing. So color perception is an issue. So there's the physiological and indeed the psychological aspect of what color means to people. But there's an even bigger problem too, and this is kind of one of the reasons that CX Lab exists. And it's not just confined to color research, but generally in business. How businesses find out stuff is they ask people questions. And as we're increasingly realizing from behavioral science, asking people questions about things is a poor way of getting to the truth. David Ogilvy, known as the father of advertising, summed it up very neatly in the 1970s. A quote I'm sure some of you have seen before is that people don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. And this is not necessarily because people are being deliberately difficult, although we know that this can happen, but rather that we're unaware of these unconscious drivers of our behavior. And when asked, we're very likely to misattribute or post-rationalize our behavior based on what we think to be true. And we might absolutely fervently believe that to be true, but that's not necessarily what's driving your behavior. And you will all almost certainly be asked multiple times a day questions about products or services to rate them out of 10, to see whether you would recommend something to your family and friends. In fact, you may even be asked to rate this presentation after the event. But you'll be doing that in a post-rationalized way. It won't necessarily be what you actually feel, what is behind the drivers of your behavior. So in that regard, we wanted to understand more about color behavior. In answering these business questions, we looked to monitor people's behavior rather than ask them questions. We put participants in environments which are like the things that we're investigating, so like the context of the behavior we're investigating, so we can find out what they do and why they do it. And in this particular study, we're obviously looking at what color influences people, where they shop, how much they're prepared to pay, and how, therefore, by understanding color and using it better, businesses could generate more sales, more income, more profit. And as in all our work, it's about understanding behavior rather than asking questions. So this particular study was for a retail opticians group and was an online behavioral study. They wanted to rebrand their stores and also increase their market share amongst a number of big name competitors. And there's a plethora of small independent opticians, which I'm sure you know about. They'd done some traditional which color do you like best kind of research by asking people, and had some doubts over the results. So they wanted to understand better from a behavioral perspective how these colors influence what people did. Specifically, they wanted to know whether color influenced first choice preference, which is clearly a key criteria in driving business in this marketplace, and also whether color influenced people's perception of value for money within a particular store, and whether one of those particular candidate colors that they had was preferred by people. We did an experiment via the very excellent Gorilla online behavioral platform and recruited 1,200 people to take part in this experiment with a balanced mix of kind of demographics. We screened people for corrected vision, so we knew they were in market. And we also wanted to find out where they last bought their glasses or contact lenses so we could understand who was their particular incumbent brand. And they carried out a number of tasks online so that we could understand a bit more about how color was influencing what they were doing. I just want to kind of give you an overview of the kind of tasks that we got people to do. So first of all, we designed and built a representation of a kind of typical shopping mall with 3 different opticians in it. And we asked participants to indicate which one they would prefer to shop in by clicking on the storefront. We rotated and counterbalanced the order of the position of all these stores, and we had our client brand competing against the 2 leading high street brands, and rotated the colors, the candidate colors, accordingly so that we could see how they compared to each other. We also forced people to make a second choice by telling them when they clicked on their first choice that the store was closed, and therefore where would they go second. So again, we could see how things stacked up in a second choice preference. Now, initially, we found that no one particular candidate color came out on top. But what we did find was that our client brand was notable in it was chosen least often amongst its competitors, highlighting the kind of the critical need for the rebranding and the exercise that they were carrying out to try and boost that first choice preference and to boost consideration and brand awareness. We also discovered that this was true even amongst the brand's existing customers, 40% of whom did not choose their own brand first, highlighting another issue in terms of the actual customer experience, and something that would also need to be addressed. So that was the first task, to rotate people through these different opportunities, these different choices. We secondly wanted to look at whether colour had an impact on cost perception. So whether colours and brands communicate value for money. So we showed participants different storefronts, and we got them to indicate how much they would expect to pay for their pair of glasses within this particular store. And we got each participant to look at 2 different stores. Again, we rotated the candidate colors of our own brand, our client brand, against the 2 leading competitors. And we found that color indeed did have a significant impact on what people expected to pay, with one of our client candidate colors offering the best value for money and comparable indeed with its competitors. And this was contrary to the kind of conscious question that we asked people at the end of our study in a more conventional way, which indicated that they saw this particular color as both expensive and indeed premium. And therefore, these 2 things running counter to each other. What people say and what people actually do being very different. So that's kind of, again, how that experiment was run. Looks very complicated, but again, each person only had 2 choices to make. In the third task, we again asked people to look at something online. We presented them with a 3D virtual representation of a store and asked them to browse within it, to have a look around. They could alter the angle that they were accessing, that they could walk around, swivel and change the shape of the store itself. And the only difference between these stores was in fact the color of the background, as you see in these images here. What was interesting was that, again, in our kind of post-experiment questioning, some 3/4 of people did not realize that these stores were exactly the same apart from the color. And some of them went into some very elaborate reasons why they found the stores to be different, even though they were only differentiated by color. Again, the associations that people make with these particular things. And in this particular part of this task that we ran, again, one color emerged as a clear preference for people, with these later questions post rationalizing that preference to do with the fact that they saw this environment as being more professional and more relaxing, with 30% of more people, in fact, preferring this particular color scheme. And finally, for the final task, we wanted to create a kind of proxy for this idea of kind of clinical excellence, something which is very, very important, clearly, in the optician's world, that the idea of trusting your eyes to someone who is clinically excellent is clearly very, very important. Long-term eye health being, absolutely critical to almost all of us. So in this virtual shopping mall, we took people back to, and we presented them this time with 2 stores, which were simply just a dentist, and again, very clearly marked with just the colors being different. But we told them to imagine that they were in urgent need of treatment. They just developed a terrible toothache, and they needed to get it sorted straight away. So where would they go? And again, we were keen to see how color influenced the decision that they made, because it was the only difference between the stores. Again, the positions were rotated amongst the 2 colors. And again, we saw that one color was significantly preferred to the others based on this test. So again, we were seeing that color was having an influence on the decisions people were making in this environment. So what do we find? In the world of kind of retail opticians, which color offers the best commercial return? In this particular case, what was the color of money? And the answer was purple. So from our behavior experiments, the different tasks that we ran in terms of value for money, head-to-head choice, and this idea of clinical excellence, purple was the clear winner in the battle of the different candidate colors, cutting through a lot of the noise that had been generated by traditional research asking people questions about which they liked. And despite the kind of complexity of the experimental design and the number of participants that we had, and the rotating and balanced nature of the study, which Gorilla was able to handle very easily, I have to say, we were able to produce this insight from initial brief to presentation in just over 3 weeks. So it can be done very, very quickly. And I guess it's just one example of the sort of online behavior experiments CX Lab have done and would like to do more of in the real world to measure this authentic behavior in different contexts, which are representative of what people would actually do in the real world, and measuring their behavior, the output, rather than what they say they would do or did do. And I guess it offers all businesses the opportunity to carry out this kind of rapid qualitative and quantitative mix of experimentation with big, robust sample sizes to provide a good degree of confidence in commercial decisions. So that's my kind of rather rapid take through one particular experiment that we've done. So thanks very much for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Tim, that's amazing. Look, just in case everybody else, I can't share my screen while you're sharing your screen. But if I understand it correctly, Tim, Vision Express came to you, asked you what color should we rebrand our company with, and rather than just going, I like these colors for whatever reasons, and reading the literature, you ran 3 experiments and found what will actually drive them the most business, and they have implemented it. If I share, I can't share my screen, but if you want to, you can go to Vision Express. Look at this. This has happened in the real world. Tim has changed the world with his science. And with behavioral science, which I just think is brilliant. It's so rare, I think, in academia. You often feel like you're doing the research, but it never has any impact in the real world. And Tim's here running experiments in the real world and informing businesses who actually change what they can do in real time, so you can see the impact. I'm really very inspired by that. And for everybody in the chat, say if you're inspired or what you to think about how your research could be applied in industry. Love world-changing sciences we've got here. Messages coming in as we chat now. I have a question for you. So delegates, if you've got a question, put them in the Q&A and Tim will answer them once he's finished chatting to me. But my question for you, Tim, is, do you think there are other applications for this kind of online fast turnaround research?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a number of things ourselves. I mean, the application is only really limited by the questions that we're being asked by businesses, of which there are many and diverse ones, as Dan has showed you. Some interesting ones as well as some rather dull ones. You know, what's the right color? And also the skill of the scientists in designing experimentation to be able to answer those questions, and the only limitations by what you can actually do online. So we're all about this tracking of behavior, so output, in the context of the marketplace customers are actually sort of operating in and buying in. So we want to emulate the choice architecture of their decision making that we make as closely as possible, and therefore its effect on their behavior. So obviously this requires us to be pretty smart in the kind of experiments we design without blowing our own trumpet too much. And it also often requires a bit of misdirection, which you can get away with a bit more in commerce than you can in academia, in terms of what people understand to be what you're trying to do, the reason that they've come to you in the first place. So we've done a whole bunch of things, from monitoring kind of driver reactions to video simulations, actually altering some variables in terms of caffeine and other kind of hunger and things like that to change to see how they react. How customers choose, pay for and play online games. So doing some work with Camelot, and indeed how much people are prepared to pay for car insurance based on the customer journey they go through online, and how much they're prepared to save. So lots of financial services kind of applications. We're currently looking into stuff on waiting time and how that affects how much people are prepared to spend in a scenario where delay is kind of inevitable. Right. So where you have to slow people down, what is the optimal time to slow people down so that they still spend what you wanted them to spend, if that makes sense?